Robert, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself quickly first, and then tell us what you've been working on the last couple days?
Okay. My name is Robert Adut. I'm founder of yaymath.org. And I found my way through you through the Uncon School. What I do is I record my math video lessons live in the classroom. I dress up in costumes. And Yay Math has been in existence for 5 years. We have over 5 million views and about 1.5 million minutes viewed per month, because people really enjoy the live student interaction with teacher, the spontaneity, the authenticity, the imperfection. And it is by that I found my way to you um, over the last few days. After our initial conversation, I've learned about what you do and how your practice of helping people use their memory, having the, what do you call it, the memory method.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. MMM.
Yep.
So I've been learning about the magnetic memory method, and I've been trying to put your tactics to use to help me in my practice of memorizing math formulas. Because I mean, even though I'm a math teacher, there's a slew of formulas that I still need to reference and look at my own crib sheets to recall. However, at your suggestion, we're going to be creating a mental crib sheet for me to memorize formulas, and that's what I've been doing pretty recently. You know, it didn't take me that long, and I can't wait to share what I've done with you and see what you think.
Okay, so say a little bit more about these formulas. What kinds of formulas are they? What characterizes them, and what region of math do they belong to, so to speak?
So there are statistics formulas. Statistics has been my latest craze, my latest passion. It's a subsection of mathematics that I've been filming most recently, and that I'm admittedly the newest to, which has been very exciting to learn on the fly. Um, and so I figured, and this is your to help people such as me to advance their craft using your methods. So I'm using your methods to help me remember these formulas for myself. And not only that, I'll be able to usher this methodology to class after class after class that I end up teaching, and give them these same tools so that they won't be always fretting about what the formulas are or how to use them or everything. I mean, that's one of the number one questions I get. It's like, what are all the formulas we need for the test? They say that. I end up writing them on the board, you know, and then just by repetition, I end up remembering them. Not always. And sometimes I don't remember them, and I say, like, I would have to commit them to short-term memory, and that's what students do. They end up committing them to short-term memory. But using this magnetic memory method, hopefully it'll be committed to long-term memory. And I hope to demonstrate that to you today now, and it's going to be fun. Can I tell you about the process, about what it was like for me?
Yeah, absolutely. But one thing I think would be very interesting for people is what do you think, in terms of getting this material into long term memory, these formulas, what are one or two or even more of the specific benefits beyond just passing a test that you could
Right.
think of that someone's going to benefit from in having this ability?
Okay, that's a good question, right? Because I definitely refuse to teach towards tests. You know, I believe that we need some form of assessment for students in general. But I think that the confidence that students, such as me in this case, can pick up a process on the fly and completely learn something that they previously had not known, nor were able to do well. Were able to do well. I mean, there's one thing to just write down formula after formula after formula and just try to commit it that way. But the process was very invigorating, I got to say, because I was able to take these things, and it was through story and images, some of the things that you talk about, and it was fun. So not only does it increase the confidence in my own capacity to learn, but it makes the process of learning fun. And that's pretty hard to do generally when it comes to memorizing formulas. I mean, they're just a bunch of symbols to the person looking at them for the first time. But turning that sort of process into a game or into a stroll down memory lane, it was kind of cool. Kind of cool to be able to do that. So I appreciate that.
Okay, so tell us then about your process.
Okay, yeah, the process. I don't know if you've known this, and I'm been curious to talk to you about this. If you're going into what you call a memory palace, and you're conjuring up images from your life that are personal to you, in fact, maybe very near and dear to you, I think it's just a matter of time before you trip up over some sort of emotionality or even like vulnerability. Even like it becomes almost like like my process, what I'm going to reveal to you today is stuff that I grew up with as a kid, and I don't really, normally if you and I were talking, as much as I enjoy your company and enjoy hearing what you have to say, I wouldn't really talk to you about what I did when people got snappy in my house. They're good. And that happens in this story. People get snappy and I'm replying to them in formula. Speak. And so there's a level of vulnerability that is required in order, at least for myself, to face this type of stuff. And then furthermore, to be able to project that out and share with other people. Have you noticed that's normal? I mean, it's not just necessarily going into a building and floor 1, 2, 3 with an elevator, and that makes sense. It could be like something occurred in that building or people were in that building that conjure up something from your past. Is that normal, or is that just me?
Yeah, it's certainly something that I haven't really myself experienced that. I'm a pretty neutral guy and sort of scientific about things, and for some reason I just have a kind of clinical ability to use a memory palace without really running into ghosts, so to speak.
Right.
But there are people who have told me they simply cannot use certain places because of a history of violence or some sort of unpleasant thing that has happened in that house or association, and that would be that they're bumping into either a direct or indirect memory. The other thing that sort of goes along with this is that you mentioned, there's things you wouldn't really want to relate that have gone through your mind in order to memorize some of this material. And this is one of the most controversial things about mnemonics and memory techniques and whatever, memory tricks, whatever you want to call them, is that they do involve certain extreme images that can incorporate sexuality, violence, usually cartoon violence, but violence nonetheless, because you're trying to evoke what I would call the rubberneck effect, where like a car accident, you simply have to turn your head and look. Yeah, there's like one now. There's one now. Actually, I think that was a helicopter smashing into a building. But there's just like something about our ability to imagine things that can be quite shocking, and that in itself creates emotional reactions. And that's certainly something that was a problem for me, because it's not always the most pleasant thing to think about these sorts of things. But at the end of the day, it's the difference between being able to memorize something and not being able to memorize it. And the fact of the matter is that the mnemonics, the associative imagery, are tools, and if you do the exercises correctly, they're really in fact short term, and you don't need to obsess upon them or anything. So the most important thing, I think, and you don't have to go see Dr. Freud to do it, is just simply not judge your images. Just go with what comes to your mind. Have a sort of clinical distance to them. Don't get too involved. But if there is emotion there and it's comfortable, then definitely exploit it, leverage it, use it for all it's worth. And just to quickly add something, the history of mnemonics was deeply suppressed in certain historical periods because of this character. It was considered blasphemy, for instance, to use associative imagery to memorize biblical verses because of the kinds of images that are used. So there's certainly things that are very controversial in that area, but my advice to anybody is just to develop a bit of a scientific distance from it, and when emotions come that you're comfortable with, just use them for all they're worth, because what is memorable can be linked to what isn't memorable in order to make it memorable. and that's a very, very
Nice.
powerful tool.
Nice. And it's definitely, I think, fortunately, I've walked the border, the fine line, exactly what you're saying. It's basically things that I would never have really had a need to share with you. Um, but if you and I were sitting over a couple beers, I would have no problem, talking about what happened in my old house, and I plan to right now, so it's kind of a fun way to get to know me.
We'll have beer
And
later.
so, yeah, well, yeah, or we'll just do it over Skype, and just talk about my childhood through statistics formulas. I mean, you got to say it's just kind of nifty. So yeah, it was definitely it brought up stuff, but nothing in a way that was detrimental, and I definitely leveraged the emotion to get into it. So I have like hand motions and things like that as well. So I'm psyched. Can I show you what I've learned?
Yeah, please, by all means.
All right, great. So we moved out of my childhood house many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and I was growing up in Maryland, and so I figured that was the first place to start if I was going to do this memory palace technique, to go back to the place where I grew up, because I haven't been there in so long, and this would be a great way to experience it. So here I come, I figure I'm walking through the door, and stop me if there's anything I can do better or whatever. I'm new to this, but I'm trying it out, trying it out hard. So I walk through the door and I get to the dining table. That's the first thing there. And something that's going on usually when we're dining, is that for some odd reason, we never really had an emphasis on napkins growing up when we're dining. It was like napkins were, oh yeah, I can use a napkin, but I never really thought to use one until one was offered. And that has gotten me in trouble in my life, like with manners and, at tables and things like that, as an adult. So I walk in to this dining table with full of family, everyone, extended family, and I say to them, napkin! I say napkin, and then they look back at me and they're like, napkin? Nah. That's the X that I think of. I was like, eh. They're just saying to me. So they say, napkin, no. And then they say no for emphasis, eh. And I say back to them, I'm like, please, stop with the eh, And then an uncle that I know is like sort of the peacemaker, and he goes, quit saying eh to the napkin request. So that's like I saw it, like that was my dialogue. It was like, I want a napkin. They said no to the napkin. They said no twice. I said, please stop saying no. And then someone said, quit saying no to the napkin request. It just sort of played out in my mind there. What do you think? Am I on the right track here?
Well, a lot depends on what formula that allows you to write out on a piece of paper.
That was the binomial distribution formula, binomial probability.
Okay, and
Is that do you have it with you? Can you follow along?
okay, we're just gonna stop
Okay.
for a second, and I'm going to. I downloaded it to my desktop, and I was looking for it, but sometimes Mac has this crazy idea to send it to different places.
Okay.
But here it is. Okay, so it blocked your face for a second, but I can edit that out. Okay, now I've got it up here on the screen. I'm going to edit it into the screen later, but yeah, it's good that I can see.
Sure. I'll give you like the official versions, so not handwritten versions.
Okay. So the binomial distribution, sort of.
Yeah, binomial probability distribution.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a little fuzzy there.
Yeah.
Okay, so this enabled you to recall the binomial probability distribution, the name of the formula, or actually the formula itself?
The formula itself.
So what about the napkin makes, I see there's an N in the formula.
That's the N for napkin. That is where my mind went. But
what does it really represent?
Oh, it represents the number of trials within. It's like trials, meaning like flipping of a coin or rolling of a die or something like that. Represents the number of trials.
Ah, okay. And then, so you mentioned the X coming.
Yeah.
2 times, and I see that there.
Right. Yeah, they're saying no to the napkin request, and they're saying with emphasis. That's why that factorial symbol is like sort of exclamation. Is an easy segue. So like no, no napkin, no twice.
Okay.
I feel
And
weird.
it is weird, but the fact of the matter is that it's working. And
Yeah,
one of the strange things, one of the weird, really weird aspects of all this is that we can explain to other people how that we came to be able to recall something by decoding this imagery. But ultimately, these examples are useful only to us. So
right.
if you put mnemonic examples into the internet, you will find thousands, if not millions, of people who have shared examples, and I think they're a barrier to entry for a lot of people because, okay, napkins, your family, this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's
Right.
wonderful that you're able to recall that, and I assume that that's going to have a particular function in an exam or in a practical setting where you're trying to calculate something that will
Right.
enable you to accomplish a goal.
Right. Right. Yeah, you're creating the ability for people to do it themselves. That's what you're trying to do. You're not trying to learn it for them. You're trying to help them learn it for themselves. And I get that. I get that. All right, continue on.
Well, how does that feel to be able to do that?
I'm saying that I'm an academic, so I jumped in with 2 feet, and I will admit that the process was weird. The process was weird because it was against the methodologies that you've already learned before. Look, we're indoctrinated with this learning models. Just speaking from one educator to another, we're indoctrinated with learning models that pretty much stop more or less at, are you a visual learner? Are you an auditory learner? Are you a kinesthetic learner? Do you learn by doing, or some sort of combination of those? And then I need to be shown, or I need to look at it, or I need to listen, and we stop there. What's cool is that this is creating an entirely different genre where you're going into your own mind and taking a stroll, and that to me is weird, but in a very good way, in a very good way, because as long as you have a sort of a sense of adventure and you're open for a challenge and something that's new, then I think it can work well. And so that was the process. It was like I was for it, but I had to get over the act of going, like, I was doing like this to myself in the room, empty. I'm chilling here, and I'm just like, like, what am I doing? I think of Family Feud is the show. That's what that comes to my mind. Again, mnemonics that are only personal. Family Feud has that thing. It was like, let's see eggs, and they're like, no, eggs is not an answer. So
it raises an interesting point, actually, because there is benefit from actually incorporating physical movement into it, and also actually moving. If you are using a memory palace that you actually have access to, there's also benefit to being in it and moving from room to room. So
yeah.
One of my greatest experiments with that was memorizing the lyrics to a song in German and actually physically moving from station to station in the memory palace as I recited it. And to what extent that actually is necessary or help the process, I don't particularly have any hard data or anything like that, but it's just sort of a memorable thing to do, and it just adds, it compounds, it gives more oomph to the process if you can do that. I also heard from someone, and I tried it myself, it was very interesting, is that she walks through the memory palaces that she can actually visit with her eyes closed, running her hands along the wall to increase this sort of sensory, spatial, material memory of the place itself, which is part of this whole idea of the magnetic, that you're magnetizing things by how that you're treating them and how you're using them. So
that makes sense.
Let's hear another one.
Okay, sure. So the next one. So my reply to all this, to my napkin, is when I say to them, when you go like this to me, it makes me have negative feelings about you. It makes everyone have negative feelings about you. So you going like this makes everyone negative to you, right? So take it back and back to you. It was like a sort of a retaliation. So if you have the formula, you'll see that it's mu, which is the mean. So it's like a U. It looks like a U.
Mm.
When you go like this, it makes everyone, E, the exponential, feel negative about you. And so I retaliate by doing it back to them.
Okay, now I'm seeing very clearly exactly how that's working.
Yeah. Okay.
And
And then yeah, what were you saying?
no, go ahead. I just have a question after.
Okay. Then, um, and then the one uncle, the peacemaker, he goes, easy, easy, easy. All right. Um, actually, it's easy, easy, et. There's three formulas there. And so the first one is easy. All this please and quit it, all this please and quit it is over now. Over now. Hopefully you're seeing that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And then the second one, he says, easy again, easy again. Please take out your bowl. And then I think I wrote the formula wrong to you. I rechecked. The third one isn't easy, it's ET. So it's ET, take out your soup, or your spoon now. So there's a bowl and a spoon. So he's basically saying it's time to eat. So saying it again, the first easy is all the please and quit it is over now. The second easy is all take out your bowl. The third one is ET, take out your spoon, and that's all over now. The second two I know are square root of now. I see it though that it's over now.
Okay.
How is are you? Kudos to you that you're able to follow along this crazy narrative.
No, I follow it exactly,
Yeah,
and I don't know these symbols, and I don't know exactly what that shape of the bowl
sigma.
represents.
Yeah,
Sigma. Okay.
sigma.
So
Standard deviation. But I needed a symbol like a bowl,
right, right.
and that's the thing. You did something with garden shears last time we spoke, and I took a cue from that. I was like, okay, just some sort of symbol. Well, we're eating, and so we were at a table, so it just makes sense that a bowl and a spoon is there.
Yeah,
So
well, that's exactly the sorts of things that you want to be doing is
yeah,
substituting, associating, and really applying that. And the other thing that's really great that you're doing is you're making a context for it. So it's not like a bowl and then Sandra Bullock, but it's a bowl and a spoon, right?
right,
And
right.
and although on the paper I'm looking at you have EZ, you mentioned that
Yeah,
it's actually ET, and then in my
et.
mind the first thing I'm thinking of is the dinner scene in the movie ET, right?
Yeah.
And so then I don't recall exactly that there's a bowl and a spoon, but there is something where they're in the dining room with him, or even at a restaurant, I think at one point. So
Yeah.
then my mind as I'm listening begins to work on this, and who knows if
Right.
I'll ever see this calculation again or this formula again, but I may have some recall of something.
Sure. Exactly. Yeah. You know that the formula of it can be easily transferred to you for you to create your own process, and I get that. I get that. So it gets really good now for the last three formulas I memorized. Okay.
But just before
And
we go, can I ask a question?
yeah, sure.
Confidence intervals you have at the top.
Yeah.
Is that just something you don't need to memorize because you know through
I
familiarity?
do. I did. I did. I had that part of the story. The part of the story was I was trying to work on the narrative, but I stumbled with the act of me gaining my confidence through Hey.
Hey, sorry, my
I cut
internet
off.
just dropped out for a
No,
second.
no sweat. No sweat. Let me get it back here. Let me shut my camera, and we're back.
It's been really great until until right then. So
Yeah.
I hope
it,
it's
it happens. It happens. So what I was saying before, what I was saying is, I was trying to weave the confidence part into the narrative that the retaliation would lead to my reestablished confidence. Yeah, so that I was getting to that, but I think I still can shore up some of this narrative work. You know what I mean?
yeah. I mean, you've
Yeah.
only been working on this really in a blitz, so to speak.
Yeah.
But what about the meaning of confidence intervals? Is that something that?
Confidence. Yeah, well, actually, no. I think that is that would be a different sort of memory battle because it's yeah, you have to know the vocabulary of it, and so I would at this point I would say like creating a different memory palace for the vocabulary. Like, what is a binomial distribution? What is a Poisson distribution? What is a confidence interval? Those types of things. Um, I think you have to know what those are in addition to this or in tandem with this. Or I think it's possible, if you get good at this, to weave confidence interval into this current memory palace as well. I mean, saying the definition of what it is, you know,
Right.
but it's a lot. It's a lot because it's you have to know the definition, and then you'll be able to do the calculations with the definition. So yeah. I think knowing the definition is probably more important. But it's easier to remember the definition than these formulas. I'm saying as both someone who teaches it and someone that is trying to learn these formulas. Formulas are a beast. They're so cryptic. Whereas you could explain, like you said in our last conversation, being able to explain something that's very challenging in a single English sentence, and then from the sentence you create an image, and then from the image you create your memory palace. So yeah, it's a different beast to memorize the definition. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that with greater experience, you may be able to incorporate that
Yeah.
as you continue developing. However, that said, I think there's a relationship here between vocabulary and grammar when using memory palaces for learning a language. So, for example, there are a lot of vocabulary rules that apply to words that look differently in different situations. So, one of the questions I always get is, do you memorize all the different permutations of a word with itself, or what do you do, right? And I think that a separate memory palace for the rules in many cases, I mean, grammar is incredibly complex and it's not really something that I've done a whole lot of work on yet, but nonetheless, there is a benefit to having memory palaces or a cheat sheet for grammar rules in a memory palace and being able to cross-index them, so to speak. So you have specific instances, like let's say that a word is a formula that has a definition, and you can memorize sort of the sound and the meaning of the word at the same time, but it needs to be cross-indexed or so with a grammatical rule in some cases. So if you're able to sort of jump from one memory palace to the other, you know, it's almost like Tesla rays or something like this, just
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it comes.
Everyone's fantasy. Everyone's
Yeah.
fantasy. Yeah. To teletransport. I've always wanted to do that.
But in terms of
Yeah.
gender for certain words, you can just incorporate certain symbols. Like one of the examples I give that I've used a lot is a boxer or boxing gloves is always somehow incorporated into an image with a masculine gender, or a skirt with a feminine gender, or fire as part of neutral. So, but definitely I think that that's a very interesting issue that people need to explore on their own and come up with solutions once they know the methods. But it sounds as though the real beast, as I think you put it, is the formulas themselves, and you've cracked the code, as we've seen from two of these things. So really, the English definitions is probably easy peasy next to this.
It would be easier. Yeah, it would be easier next to this because it's a conceptual thing. You can explain, and I've explained that numerous times to students. Confidence interval is like the interval in which you believe the true population lies. It's like, if you do a survey and you say that 80% of people believe in climate change in my survey, then you do some interval somewhere between 80%, give or take 2%, is the true population percentage that believes in climate change. So it's like you can try to, once you understand the definition, then the beast is this thing. And I would need to cross-index is I believe in that. I would need to cross-index.
Okay. And
okay.
Are these all the confidence intervals, or just ones that you selected for this particular exercise?
These are pretty much there's three general confidence intervals. One for P, which is a percentage. One for X bar, you see that is for means, for averages. And one for standard deviation, the bowl, the sigma. Mm-hmm. There's three of them there, where it's like you do a sample study, and then you ask yourself, to what degree does my sample apply to the population at large? That's basically what a confidence interval is. And these are pretty much those three, at least with the introductory statistic studies. So those three.
Okay. Do you want to do some more?
Sure, I could do some more. I'll do these last three ones. And then I wanted to share with you a brief story about how, unbeknownst to me, I was doing your methods without even realizing it. And before we had even met, I wanted to tell you. And the kids love it. It's one of the best. It's one of the best videos that people like. So I'll end with that one. But okay. Basically, so these last formulas is, so after all this stuff, I'm not really hungry. All this yelling back and forth, take out your bowl, take out your spoon. It sounded very sort of like dictating to me. So when I was a kid, to blow off steam, I would play Nintendo. And one of my games on Nintendo was Ninja Gaiden. It was a ninja game.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so, you remember Ninja Gaiden? And so I just remember, because what prompted me was that it's called chi-squared on the bottom. It looks like a throwing star. So that's just how that was my the throwing star. And so it goes like this. Now, one sword. So it's like the minus sign here. There's the minus sign, and the sword, is like this. Now one sword. Then the opponent says, two swords. And then there's two throwing stars. So now one sword, two swords, S squared, and that's over two throwing stars. And that's twice around the bowl. I don't know why it's around the bowl, but it's probably because I didn't want the bowl and I wanted to go play Nintendo. I just made that one up. I just did that one on the fly.
Okay.
But it works. After I play the game, I'm hungry again. So I go back to the kitchen, and they present the food. Now here. See, that's n equals. Now here is the equals. Uh-huh. All right, so here we go. More of my past. My parents were born in Iran, and so I grew up with a whole array of Iranian cuisine. And I'm going to tell you what one of those dishes was. It was called zeresht polo. Zeresht polo is sort of a raisin rice. Okay, so they have zeresht polo, 2 servings of the zeresht. That's z squared. So zeresht polo with quince. That was another thing it was served with, and that's poured all over 2 eggplants. Are you following with the formula where it says it?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the second dish was 1 serving of zeresht, okay? And then the bowl is back, so you pour it in the bowl, and that's over 1 serving of eggplant. But I'm hungry, so I want that twice. Okay. That's the square. That's the squaring. So, again, Now, picturing I took a flight over to Germany and I was hanging out with you and we're having the beers, I would have no problem. I would have no problem explaining to you that I grew up with the Iranian household with a bunch of Iranian cuisine, and zeresh polo was one of them. Zeresh polo is raisins with rice and quince, you know, and that eggplant would have been on the table too. I would have no problem explaining that to you. But had it not been for this opportunity, I never would have gone there probably. I would have talked about, you know, relevant stuff. That's what I'm saying. Go ahead.
Do you have any alternative ideas that you could use to also memorize this stuff that comes to mind?
Alternative ideas? How do you mean?
Well, you've gone to this particular dish and
Yeah.
how that it was involved in your culture and so forth. But if you were pressed to come up with a different set of information, do you think that you could have an alternative mnemonic associative imagery?
Sure. I mean, isn't the list infinite?
Yeah, it could well be. But I'm just curious because, as we're saying, everybody has their own sort of take, but a lot of people will wonder, well, you know, what if I don't have anything? And so I'm just trying to think of...
So what if I don't have anything? Well, I mean, you have to, okay, look, as someone that's new to this, I think my in was finding where I reside within the palace. What are the images associated? What are the actions? You know, all those things. Now here was the n equals. And that to me was the challenge. And I would be sort of lost in thought thinking about that. The second I come up with an applicable narrative, an applicable palace, then I'll be able to do it. And I'm saying, like, I'm not, it didn't take that long, but it was definitely a lot of effort. I was sitting here this morning and I was just thinking, oh, it's coming at trying. Where am I? Where am I? What am I doing? Who's around? What are they saying? What do I smell? How do I feel? What's the temperature in the room? These are the things that, and so it's not an easy process by any means, but it definitely, once you're there, then it starts to hit. So it's sort of like it comes in waves. But I wouldn't, without, you know, wasting your time, be able to come up with another palace like on the spot or something that would make sense to me. Like I could go to zebras and pigs and quail. That was one. ZPQ would be zebras and pigs and quail. But they don't really have any particular personal meaning to me. But I would have no problem. And then elephants on the bottom, right? All over the elephant. I wouldn't really have a problem remembering it. You know, like you said, you call it the training wheels. You know, you use them to usher in the memory into your head. And then once it's in there, then you can take off the training wheels. You don't necessarily need to remember zebras and pigs and quails and elephants. But maybe the fact that I've said it 3 times will help me take off those training wheels. So right.
Well, just for the benefit of people watching this, I think that one of the things to be said is if you're not able to have z squared with p and q associated with something so convenient as a dish, which I actually want to say something about that in a second, but
Please.
If you didn't have that, you could, for instance, you gave the example of a zebra and a pig and a quail, right? Well, you could have the zebra swinging some sort of appropriate weapon at the pig, who is then being attacked by the quail at the same time, or somehow get all these images in there. But the point is without a personal association, the technique is to exaggerate the violence or exaggerate the action and to make everything big and vibrant and colorful and just zooming with action so that you're creating this rubberneck effect if you're not able to bring anything personal to it. So I think that is a clue for people who are just kind of like, well, I don't have any sort of exotic dish that sounds just like that. But what I do want to say about that is that one of the most amazing things that I've noticed both in myself and in others when they start to get into this stuff, I don't have any data on the unconscious mind for this, but it seems as if the unconscious mind seems to arrange things conveniently. and that there seems to be just an absolute overflow of coincidental opportunity to link things. And again, I don't know how to account for that or test it scientifically, but it's my impression. It's my impression on a personal level, anecdotal level, and anecdotal level from other people. And it almost feels as if there's sort of a reverse undertow or something like that, where the mind prepares things in advance and is just ready there for you as if it knows. And again, I don't want to get into woo-woo or pseudoscience or bizarre things, but that's a feeling that I have. And it's just almost too convenient at some points. And I don't know if that's something that people can cultivate or not, but it is something to think about and try to even just focus on allowing to happen. And that's one of the sort of things that you described is, well, what am I going to do? Where am I? What's the temperature? Who's here? That's a process of allowing something to happen. And then when you just kind of get out of the way, it starts to come, and you get this kind of effect, I think, that I'm talking about, of just convenient imagery just sort of popping up. So I'm curious,
Wow.
did you do anything to relax yourself, which is one of the key things that I teach in order to enable this kind of flooding up of imagery?
I did. I'm again. I as a teacher myself, I believe in creating space to learn, and so I cleared the morning. I had a good breakfast. I slept well, and so I once I sat down, I was fully focused and without other sort of stressors of the mind or in my life in the way. I do that as a learning practice automatically. And so I'm glad that you make that goal explicit. That's a very, very good explicit goal that you have. Can I just comment about your claim about the subconscious mind, the unconscious mind? I think it's so interesting and a very interesting claim and makes a lot of sense. And my reason as to why, my guess, is that we are always in survival mode. And it seems like the brain's role in survival is to create predictability, to create order. And so wouldn't it make sense that it would do that subconsciously in the face of all this chaos, that it's just ready to go to put things into buckets so that we could have some level of predictability, and predictability leads to survival. So I think that that's a very, very plausible claim, and one that I'm going to think about a long time after our conversation.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of related research that into the unconscious that they've done through certain tests and so forth that relate to this, that definitely can be investigated, but
yeah,
something to get into at a certain point. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about is, it sounds as if you have managed to do all of this, which is actually pretty substantial, in one room. Is that the case?
Yeah, I did in one room.
And do you feel that you could go to, say, the confidence intervals information without having to first visit the binomial probability distribution information? Or do you need to start at the beginning?
Look, now maybe I could start at any room, but at the beginning I needed the full tour. I needed to go into the house. I needed to see the dining table first. I needed to go into the family room and play Nintendo, and then I needed to go into the kitchen for the dishes. So I think early on I needed to go from room to room, and now, especially with this coaching that you're giving me, I can start in one room.
Mm-hmm. Now, what is your, if you could, assuming all of this material, you were able to retain it as well as you have now after spending really what sounds like a pretty insubstantial amount of time this morning.
This morning. Yeah.
Assuming that you retained it for a week, and you had an exam next week.
Yeah.
Take us to the process. Like, how do you think you would recall this information, and how would you use it? What would be the test exam? I'm asking as someone who has never done an exam like this, but I'm sure people will be interested in
the camera for a second.
Oh, did my
Goes
camera?
for a second. Or in the sound too, yeah.
Okay.
Think of it here. There we go. Say it again.
If you were assuming that, let me, maybe a little drink here. Good thing,
Yeah.
good thing we have editing technology.
Yeah, we do.
Um, what I want to ask, even though you're not actually going to do this, if you had to produce this information on a test, say next week, and assuming that your recall, you maintained your recall through, rehearsing it several times between now and then to make sure that it sticks and to re-amplify it, what is that test situation going to look like? What do you expect to see on the exam, and how do you predict that you would use these constructions that you've built inside of a memory palace in order to assist you in passing that exam and being successful?
Right. That's a good question. That's a good question because many times I think the important part of an exam is not only to know the formula, but to know when it applies and which problem to use it, which problem to apply it. It's sort of like knowing when to use a screwdriver or a wrench or a hammer. It's the same idea. You have to know when to use which tool. And so what I would do is that just given, like if I'm trying to embody what it's like for a student to take a test with the pressure and all that stuff and the fear of not remembering, I would suggest coming into the exam and just going through my memory palace, going through that process and writing down all the formulas at the top of the page, just getting all of them down. Getting all of them down will be really important. At least that takes the pressure off from having to recall it at any specific moment. From there, knowing when to apply which formula to which problem is exactly what you're saying about the cross-indexing, because you would need to look for keywords within the problems. The problems would say, for example, what is the confidence interval estimate if my sample size is 40 people and my margin of error is 2%? Like they would give you the M, they would give you the N, they would give you the E, they would give you the P, they would give you the Q, and they would give you all those things, but like being able to cross-index, knowing to use that confidence interval formula for that problem would be an entirely, I feel like, a different memory palace that you need to teletransport to. Unless you embed it within, like you said, as I get more advanced, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to model what it's like for someone that's going into your methods with fresh eyes, and help your viewers figure out this process as someone that's doing this basically from square one. And so, yeah, I think as of now, I would need to do the cross-index method where you have a different set of rules and a different narrative, different palettes, different images, different actions that would be able to reference the narrative of the formulas themselves. As of now, I have not been able to create an expanded version that includes all of them. No.
How long do you think, just knowing where you're at now and not knowing how fast you could get and how accurate you could get, how long do you think, knowing what you know about standard exams in this area, how much time do you think you would need to invest in sufficiently memorizing and then rehearsing the material so that you were confident that you had it available as a crib sheet in your mind in order to be successful in a standard exam, an exam of consequence that would make a difference in a student's life,
Right,
to be able to pass it?
right. How long? Well, I guess that's relative. I think I would say, I will tell you that being vaguely familiar with these formulas before, I know that for example, I know that there are confidence interval formulas. In fact, I know that there's 3 confidence interval formulas. I knew that going in, but I didn't know what they were, except by just looking. I'd have to look at the papers. It took me 35 or 40 minutes to remember 9 formulas. And And then with that, I think you can say double that time to get the concepts as well, like what a confidence interval is, what a binomial distribution is, what they're used for, and those types of things, which are, honestly more important than the formulas themselves. Yeah, you have to be able to define what you're talking about before you take out the tool from the toolbox. But I'm telling you, 35, 40 minutes for 9 formulas is very efficient, and it's not going anywhere, especially if now I have the narrative, I can take it with me everywhere. I don't have to consult notes all the time. I don't have to write down again and again. That was my method before, is to write the formula. I said to myself, well, if I don't have the formula memorized, let's see how I feel about that after writing it 5 times. And then I'll reevaluate whether I've memorized it. So I'd write down 5 times. So in answering your question, it's not only a matter of time that's beneficial, but it's the process. The process, it's not lame. It's not a waste of time. It's not a drag. It's not a drag on your consciousness. It's more of like, okay, where am I? It's introspective, which I like. I like that a lot, as weird as it was at first.
Do you think that there are any students that this method would either not appeal for, or just appeal to, or just be outright wrong for?
Yes, I do. I come across a lot of students. I think anyone, and this is not a judgment or any lack of respect for any students or any type of student out there. I think what's happening in education today is that some people really more and more are demanding a spoon-feeding system in which you just say, this is what it is, this is what you need to memorize, here's what they are, and then they'll go through process of just trying to pound it into their brain, and then once it's done, in survival mode, they'll forget about it and move on. Any student that insists on the results only, that insists on not really focusing on process, that insists on doing it one way that has worked before and not ready to question or adopt new methodologies, this isn't for them. This isn't for them. Because it seems like you're sort of walking backwards. You could be spending time working on formulas. You could be spending time making flashcards. You could be spending time doing that stuff that has worked and served you in the past. Why would I want to think about going back in my past and talking to my family at the dining table and doing like this? Napkins, no. It's very different. And so if you're not ready to step outside your comfort zone and sort of confront a new method that you never even considered before, then yes, then it's better to stick to the flashcards. I think you, of all people, would not mandate your method to anyone that had sort of a tangible amount of trepidation going in, being like, I don't know, Palace, not really for me. You wouldn't force it on them. They have to be ready to do it. They have to be ready to do the work and go into their mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's certainly voluntary.
Voluntary.
It's got to be voluntary. You got to be into it. But I think that a lot of people don't do it because, actually, I think that the term memory palace turns a lot of people off. I think it's an incredibly sexy term, but I heard from one guy who said that he couldn't even get started because he disliked the term so much. And he told me, this was an 80-year-old man, but he told me that he finally came up with apartments with compartments. That was his preferred term. And I just said, hey man, whatever works, go with it. Call them red chickens in a field, whatever you want. Just get over the hump of what it's called, and get over the fact that it's not just that it's one step back to go into your mind and start doing all this sort of work, but it's really 2 or 3 steps back because you need to learn the technique in the first place.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it's kind of like it's kind of like being a bit of like a person who gets invited to the cockpit. You see all the instrument dials, and the plane is already flying. I remember when I was a kid, we were going to Disneyland, and this was way back before people were flying planes into buildings. And the pilot came, or the stewardess came out and said, "Hey, you want to come and see the cockpit?" And I was like, "Sure." And I was 9 years old, and I went up to the front, and I was able to actually see the two guys sitting there, and everything out the sky, and I just got the sense of wonder of this what seems extremely complicated. So first encountering this is kind of like visiting the cockpit, and you see, and it's just like, I'll never be a pilot. I'll never know how to do all this stuff. You know, it's just overwhelming. But then let's just say you decide to give it a try. And before you ever get that plane into the sky, there's a bit of training that's involved. You got to understand this, you got to understand that. Oh, there's this principle, there's that principle. And, you know, but once you get that plane into the sky once or twice, well, every time that plane has to go to the pickup thing, it's got to pick up the passengers before, and it's got to taxi to the runway. But as soon as it gets to the runway, it goes into the sky and it flies. And it does it again and again and again and again, and every time it's successful. And that's basically what this is. So you first see the wonder, you give it a try, you start to learn the technique, and then you learn to fly, and then you come back and you pick up more passengers, the passengers being the memory. Then you taxi to the runway, and then you get up in the sky. And it's not a bad metaphor as well, because eventually the plane's going to land, and if you don't keep fueling the jet, then the memories are going to fade, but you'll pick up new ones, or you pick them up again, because the same passengers sometimes take the same flight, you know? So it's, I think that's a really nice metaphor that I came up with on the fly for how this all works, but you definitely have to step back before you fly every time.
You definitely have to.
But do you think it's a worthy investment, something that you would gladly teach others to do?
Yeah, it's definitely a worthy investment. I think it should be an offering. It should be an offering. Because, I mean, let's talk about the guy that was uncomfortable with Memory Palace, okay? If someone's uncomfortable with Memory Palace, and then they have one of two choices. They can say, apartments with compartments, now I'm ready to work with you. Or they can say, Memory Palace, I'm not into it, and they back away. It's all about their attitude. It's all about their attitude, how they approach the thing. Do they use it as an opportunity to find their own in, to give something a try, a reasonable try, to take those few steps back and learn the methodology and then move forward? Or are they going to look for some scapegoated excuse? I don't like the word palace. I'm sure you're going to have people that it doesn't. Well, I don't need a palace. I'm not royalty. I don't believe in that. And then they'll back away. It's just an excuse to not do it. So I think what you're saying is right. Voluntary. I believe it should be an offering. I'm going to offer it to my students as a methodology. But at the end of the day, it has to come from the learner, because it's your journey. It's your images. Even our conversation early on, what we were stumbling on was for you to create your images when it came to these formulas, and then your aha moment was so helpful, and that it was really about me creating these learning journeys, or this Memory Palace journey, because this is my craft. This is what I do for a living. This is what I try to help people do. And so I appreciate the fact that you turned it around to the learner. So I think that's the same advice that you need to give all your learners. Is it's really up to them to try it out and see if it works for them. But they have to take those 2 steps back and really learn the cockpit. You know?
Yeah, I think we should just clarify what you're referring to. We had met before, and the idea of this was that you were going to teach me math or some mathematical principles. I was going to memorize those formulas or principles, and then I was going to demonstrate how that I did it. And we sort of struggled for about an hour, I think, in terms of me thinking, well, first of all, what are we going to use as an example? Me not being a mathematician, not having any applicable interest in math as such. I mean, we talked about conversion rates and things that have to do with websites and so forth being interesting to me. And also, I'm just interested in math as a concept. But in terms of the sorts of things that you're presenting now with confidence intervals, this is just, what can I possibly bring from myself when there's nothing at stake, there's nothing of interest and so forth. So what we ultimately ended up deciding is that what are we thinking here? Why don't you learn my method and then you apply it to something that has consequence for you and something that you're clearly passionate about and deeply invested in and interested in? And I think that really raises a point, and I wouldn't want anybody to turn anybody away from any topic at all in education. But I think that it does raise the point that a lot of people are into a subject area because they have an end goal that they aren't really in love with, because they have a myth about getting a job on the other side. So
Yeah.
one of the things that may prevent people from having success with mnemonics or memory techniques or memory palaces is simply that they're not in love with what they're trying to memorize. They're not passionate about it. They're doing it for some reason that is not authentic, it's not real, it's not love. And so that may be the true barrier here, because it is going to take an extra investment, not very much. 45 minutes for 9 formulas is nothing, you know. It's really, at the end of the day, in comparison to what you can do with that. But it may be, and it has to be said, that at some level the barrier can be that there's not enough true authentic interest in the topic in the first place in order to warrant just any kind of learning, really. So that may, I just wanted to throw that out there.
That's right. No, I see it every day. You hit it on the head there. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, what's interesting is that you might be able to sell, like you were saying earlier today, you might be able to sell the topic through these mnemonics as well. And I'm going to conclude my process of memory palaces and this learning technique with you, with evidence that I have actually done this subconsciously without even knowing it. All right, and it has to do with the quadratic formula. Okay, so look, as someone who's not in an algebra class right now yourself, you know, you have a respect for math as a concept, but there's no need for you to walk around and memorize the quadratic formula. So I get that. So when I try to teach that formula to my students, it's just a bunch of gibberish to them, especially at first. But I came up with a mnemonic that they love, and I'm going to share it with you. And I've been doing this for years, well before you and I had met. I've been doing this for years, and I'm going to share it with you, okay? It may help to have the formula in front of you. Could you maybe write it? I can recite it to you, and then you'll look at it with me.
Okay. I'm just getting a pen and paper here.
All right.
I have my fancy new Collins pen.
Fancy. Okay, so the formula is negative b.
Negative.
Plus or, negative b, plus or minus.
How do I write plus or minus? Like plus slash minus?
A plus and then a minus below it.
Okay.
The square root of. Oh. And it's a long. Actually, I'll put it up on the screen for you. You can look at it. You see it?
Okay, I'll just finish copying it here. B.
Yeah, copy it down.
And 2a. Okay, I got it.
Okay, so that's the formula for the quadratic form. That's the quadratic formula. Okay, so here's the mnemonic that I did. I would write it on the board, and I would say, okay, class, here's the story about the negative boy who couldn't decide yes or no to go to a radical party. But the boy was a square, and he missed out on minus 4 awesome chicks. And the party was all over at 2 a.m.
Okay.
They love it. They love it. They love it. They come in the next day talking about it. It just gave it a narrative. The story of the negative boy who missed out on 4 awesome chicks. They love that stuff, you know. And it's interesting that we found our way together, and I'd been doing this without even realizing it. So.
Well, my immediate instinct would be, and I think that it would help people who would struggle even with that, and I think it would benefit people who don't struggle with that, using a narrative like that, is to locate that someplace, to actually see that in a particular place. So I would, if I was going to work on that, I would see it either where I'm in the room now, or I'd pick a specific memory palace and locate it somewhere, so that I have a place to go when I'm looking for it. And then I would want to actually see that and make sure I spend some time exaggerating the imagery and bringing color and action to it. So that would just be my response to that, to add more from the kinds of techniques that I put into things. And I think we need to restart because we are frozen.
Hey.
Weird, but it it dropped again.
Yeah.
But is there anything else that we haven't covered that you think should be
No,
mentioned?
no. Well, no, and I've talked about everything that I wanted to process. You've given me a lot to think about. Is there anything else you wanted to figure out and inquire from me? Do you need anything else from me, or however else I can help you with this? This has been great.
Yeah, I think my only thing is I hope it continues so we can help more people actually adopt these techniques and at the very least do things with the sort of formula that you just shared with the negative boy, and maybe experiment with people who struggle with even that and see about adding a memory palace component to it to give it, for what might for some people give it an extra oomph, so to speak, and also as a kind of gateway drug, so to speak, into more mnemonics when they see that sort of power coming together.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Giving it a shell, giving it a framework, as opposed to just a simple like a cutesy narrative, because that's what I've done up to now. But yeah, like they can envision themselves at the party. They can see who's there. They can ask why or who the four awesome chicks were, or all those sort of add-ons to help the image come to life. You know, Anthony, this has been really, really special for me. I think this is a huge opportunity for me to be able to share this conversation with you, and I think you're doing really great work. And I just hope that whoever is watching this and your students understand that as someone that works in academics, that use this method for the first time today and learned about it only a few days ago. It's really special, and you're really onto something, and I'm just really happy to be a part of it. So thanks for this opportunity.
Oh, and thank you for bringing your expertise to the practice.
Got it.
Good.
Got it.
Okay, thank you.